Awesome. Cheers, Liz. So without further ado, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our fantastic speaker who's joining us this evening. So Sophie Benbow is Head of Marine at Fauna and Flora International, which is the world's oldest international wildlife conservation organisation, whose main focus is on protecting biodiversity. So Sophie sort of heads up all of the FFI's marine conservation initiatives. She's worked with the FFI for 8 years and previously led coral reef research and sustainable fisheries management with Blue Ventures, which was focused in Madagascar. So Sophie, thank you so much for coming with us this evening. And whenever you're ready, if you want to share your screen and get started, we can't wait to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks so much for a lovely introduction, Jasmine. And yeah, a real pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Very honoured to be part of the Nature Natter crew, a very illustrious lineup that you've got for everybody, which is fantastic to see. I'm just trying to share my screen, so let me know when you can see that. Should be all good.
Yep, that's coming up for us.
Super. So yes, I don't think I need to tell you who I am again because Jasmine's already run you through that. But I guess I just wanted to start with why am I here and why I do what I do. So a beautiful picture of the ocean. And obviously it's a fantastically important ecosystem for everybody on Earth. It covers 70% of the planet. It provides every second breath that we take. It feeds the world through fisheries, and it has the potential to mitigate more climate change than the tropical rainforests do. So it really does have huge potential to be our savior in all of this global conflict and strife that we're facing as a planet in terms of the environmental threats. So that's why my focus is on the ocean. And I think I'm going to go back to the beginning, obviously, now with kind of how I got to where I am today. And I know these talks seem to have to come with an embarrassing baby photo. So here's mine. I grew up in central London, so not all that close to nature, not that close to a huge amount of biodiversity and kind of nature. But we spent every holiday that I can remember by the seaside, either in Cornwall or on the Isle of Wight, largely in the UK. And I think there was like an inherent love of the ocean just instilled from a really young age. Then I guess I've jumped quite a number of years, but I really wanted to be a doctor actually for a very long time, but then realized that I was not very good at chemistry. And at that time, to go into medicine as a degree, you had to have a chemistry A-level, and I didn't want to do that. So my kind of alternate route into medicine was to do biology at university. And then there was another way to get into it after that. But my thinking quickly changed when I got into biology. So I went to Durham University, entered on biology, and then in I think it was the third year, I switched into zoology, so animal biology. And it was really during my time at Durham that I got completely hooked by the ocean. So I did some volunteering in the long summer holidays. I went to Croatia, volunteered on a great dolphin project there. And it was a bit of a life-changing experience for me, just in terms of being on the water, seeing these fabulous species. And for me, cetaceans, so dolphins and whales, were the big hook into the marine conservation world. I then went on to do my thesis for my undergrad on cetaceans around Tenerife, and then chose to do a master's straight after my undergrad at UCL, so University College London, in London. And again, that was a conservation master's, so quite broad in its outreach, but I specialised and did my thesis, in cetaceans again, this time in Scotland, so slightly less glamorous than Tenerife, but still a really interesting project. And some of that work hopefully has been used to kind of guide some of the thinking about protected areas up there. Obviously, when you finish your degree or degrees, there's a big kind of life decision to be made. And I was in a very fortunate position that my parents are based in London. I grew up in London, and I managed to get an internship with a great organisation called Blue Ventures. So I was a science intern in London, waitressing in the evenings to kind of get some pocket money, but living with my parents again, which was a really yeah, I recognize that's a fortunate situation that I had, that I was able to do that. But I think interning for an organization, and I know not everybody can afford to do it, but it is a really good way to get into an organization. And through that, I was very fortunate that they seemed to like me. I seemed to be a good fit for them, and the role evolved. And it took me to Madagascar. So a very wonderful country. But the road to the field site looked like this. So it took us about 8 to 10 hours in a 4x4, 12 to 24 hours, I would say, in a kind of truck. Quite an adventure to start when you're moving to a new country for the first time. But it was a really wonderful place. And I would say I was very much living the dream for a number of years. So I was living in a hut on the beach with a view of the ocean. I could hear the waves when I slept. It was really a fantastic place to spend quite a lot of time. So I think I was very lucky in that. So I was working as a field scientist, supporting international volunteers that would come to Madagascar for a 6-week program when they would learn to dive. We would train them in fish identification and coral identification so that they could collect data on the reefs in the area, and we could track changes over time to those reefs. And then again, that job evolved, and I ended up staying in Madagascar for 5 years in total. So the job evolved into marine science coordinator role. And I did a lot of diving, which again was very much living the dream for me. It was, yeah, a very fantastic time. But it also led me to this humble creature, the octopus. So I don't know if many people have necessarily seen an octopus or know much about the fishery for them, but it's a really important fishery in southwest Madagascar and in most of the Western Indian Ocean, actually, in that it's essentially a cash crop. So there's a huge export market for octopus in this region. And it's a really direct way of local fishing communities to be able to get a source of income. And it's a very simple fishery, so it's very accessible to a huge number of people. I forgot about this. So I just wanted to flag that it's a simple fishery, so people can just literally walk out on the reef flat with a spear. They look for octopus hiding in their dens, and then they fairly brutally tease them out with their spear and then stab them and take them home and sell them on the beach. But while it's simple in essence, I wanted to just show you this picture. So this is an example of what the reef flat looks like. And there is an octopus hiding in this picture. If anybody can attempt to find it, I will tell you, don't worry. But just as an example of how well camouflaged they can be. So I'll show you. There he is, hiding right in the middle. So it's a bit of an easy picture, that one, because he's right in the middle. And then a little zoom up. So that's how they're camouflaged. And he's actually quite exposed. So normally they're even further in a hole and you just see a few bubbles or maybe a little bit of tentacle sticking out. So it's a simple open access fishery, but you have to be quite skilled. And I have been on the reef flat looking for octopus, and they're very hard to find, I can confirm. So as I said a few times, it's a very open access fishery. So a lot of, particularly in Madagascar, the men will go off in canoes to go fishing slightly further offshore, targeting reef fish. Whereas the women, children, and the older people can just directly walk out on the reef flat at a low tide and catch octopus. So it's a really valuable fishery in that regard. And then this picture of the lorry is the very low-key logistics of how they export the octopus in the first stage. So basically, this lorry is sent to the village every month on the low tide. And that white box is filled with ice, and the octopus are put in there, and then they're driven back along that very bumpy, sandy road to the regional capital, Tulia in southwest Madagascar, where they're processed and then beautified and then exported mostly to southern Europe. So yeah, it's a very interesting fishery, and it took up a lot of my life in Madagascar for a large number of years. Part of the work that Blue Ventures is doing, and this is now a kind of model and approach that's been scaled and replicated throughout the Western Indian Ocean and increasingly beyond, where there's an appropriate fishery, but these short-term fishery closures for octopus in particular. So octopus only live for about 12 to 15 months. And if you close an area of reef flat for 2 to 3 months, you give them time to grow almost exponentially. So the octopus that you would have caught on day one is then left in the water for an additional 2 months. And after that time period, it's very much bigger. So it's very much more valuable. And that was the fishery management technique that we were introducing through Blue Ventures. The other really valuable part of that is that it's a really good way to build the trust with the community. So by coming in, engaging with them on a relatively small scale, but then showing them the financial benefits of that, we were then able to engage them in establishing more permanent protected areas. And there's now a locally managed marine area, which covers a much larger area of the coast there, and is a really fantastic example of how things can evolve once the community is on board and bought into everything. So we did a lot of work with the communities on the octopus. We did an awful lot of data collection. So I spent a lot of time staring at spreadsheets and trying to do some data analysis of what's going on. Very simply, we basically weigh them and record where they've been caught from and who's caught them. For a subsample, we also then sexed them, so identified whether they were male or female, and then a portion of those, again, we did some gonad analyses to test reproductive stage, so we could try to understand the reproductive cycle to target when the closures might be most appropriate. So getting hands-on with a huge number of octopus was always fun. This is me training some of the volunteers onto how you can tell the difference between a male and female octopus. But there was a real capacity building element to everything that we did with Blue Ventures as well. So engaging with the international volunteers, but also engaging the communities. So in the previous image was a community member who had been trained and then employed to record the octopus catch data and feed that into the overall program of work. This is a less nice image, I guess, but this was Cyclone Funzo, which passed through in 2012. And really, I've just put this slide in to show you quite how vulnerable some of these communities are to the increasing impacts of climate change. You can see they've got no barrier between them and the sea. They're building increasingly on the beach. They use the beach for everything. And you have a storm event like this that passes through. And it's, it's a big event and it has the potential to do an awful lot of damage. So when we're thinking about climate change and mitigation and adaptation, I think this is quite a powerful image, and that it just shows you that these are the people that are most affected or will be most affected by it. And so these are the people that we need to be figuring out a way for the ocean to protect them rather than potentially damage some of what they do. So after 5 years or so with Blue Ventures, I made quite a big move and I took up a role at Fauna and Flora International, or FFI, where I'm currently based in Cambridge, which is very beautiful, very different from Madagascar, but a nice change at that time. I was kind of ready for that. I started work with FFI about 8 or 9 years ago now, and it was a maternity cover role. So these are jobs where you come in and you look after a position essentially while a lady goes off and has a baby, which is all good. But it's also a really good way to get into an organization, a bit like an internship. So if you're in a position where you can kind of take a risk that a 6 to 12 month contract might evolve into something more, then I think, and it certainly served me well, it's a very good way to get an in to some of these larger organizations. So when I started with FFI, I covered the Asia Pacific Marine Programme, and I was really lucky that I had some fantastic trips quite early on into that. And this was, we went to Myanmar, where we have quite a large programme of work, but this was very near the beginning of that, where we were training some of the local staff, some government representatives, and reps from the university as well, gave them some simple dive training. And then we used that dive team to do the surveys, the marine surveys. So building the capacity of the local staff, the local teams in country to be able to deliver and monitor the coral reefs over the longer term. And again, I was very fortunate that we ran a liveaboard expedition with that dive team that I was able to join, which was a really fantastic experience. 10 days sailing up and down the south coast of Myanmar was quite a change from Madagascar in terms of everything really, kind of culture, species, everything that was going on. But a really fantastic opportunity that I was very, very grateful for. And it was made all the better because of some of the people that were on board with us. So the guy on the left is Zhao Lun. He's the current head of the marine program in Myanmar. He's a Burmese. And then David Abora on the right, who's a Kenyan coral reef scientist based in Mombasa. And they really are real champions, I would say, for marine conservation, and great people to spend some time with. Also some really interesting experiences and learning for me coming from Madagascar in terms of the different shape of the fishing industry, and the different ways that people fish. So this is a Burmese fishing vessel, a Moken boat, which is very much bigger than the canoes that the kind of small scale fishers were using in Madagascar. And also the Octopus followed me, finding some interesting and kind of innovative ways that people are fishing octopus. So this was a really simple, essentially a pot and trap method. So they're using shells tied onto a line of rope and putting it in the water. And then the octopus think it's a den, so they hide in it, and then the fishermen can just come and pick it up later. So quite creative in their fishing methods. So as well as Myanmar, I was supporting work in Cambodia in my first role with FFI. This is a picture of a village within Cambodia's first marine protected area that was established in 2018, and FFI had a really strong role to play in that. So a big success for us in terms of what we had achieved, very much with a community-based approach, engaging and consulting with the local stakeholders and everything that happened. And another key area of work in Cambodia is mangroves. So this poor lonely mangrove tree or sapling clearly needs a bit of help, needs some friends. So looking at restoration of mangroves where they've been cut down, so people use mangrove wood for construction, for building houses, or for fuel wood as well, for cooking. And lots of projects are now trying to do this. And there are good ways to do it and bad ways to do it. And I think FFI is really trying to follow best practice and do things the right way. Mangrove restoration as well has a real kind of climate mitigation angle to it, as well as a carbon sequestration angle. So it's a win-win in many different ways. Excuse me. And it's a really good way of engaging the communities because it's very simple to plant a mangrove seed sapling, and it's a great way to involve the community. So after just under a year at FFI in the Asia Pacific role, a permanent role came up that I was able to apply for. So I joined the Eurasia team. And this took me to beautiful Turkey, which was another really wonderful experience. Here we were working with a network of no fishing zones, so very small but complete no-take areas, so no fishing of any kind was allowed. You find the Mediterranean monk seal, which used to be critically endangered, is now endangered on the red list, but still in need of support. And we were engaging, or we still are engaging, with a fantastic local Turkish NGO there that are doing a great job and are really scaling up now the successes from the early days to cover nearly 500 kilometers of coastline. So a really fantastic program of work in Turkey. One of the key threats, this is a bit of a ugly picture, but this is a frozen pufferfish. So he's not from the Mediterranean. He's come from the Red Sea through the Suez Canal. As the temperature of the Mediterranean is warming, it's becoming more hospitable to those more tropical species, and they have a direct access link through the Suez Canal. So when I first started work in Turkey, they were in the midst essentially of a pufferfish invasion, that these giant fish were coming in, eating the local fish species, damaging fishers' nets, and really being a not great addition to the ecosystem. And this is a continuing problem for Turkey, and it will continue to be a problem. So after the pufferfish, which are still there, but the numbers have now balanced out a little bit, then they had the rabbitfish, and now they've had their first lionfish in the last year or so, which again are a kind of predatory invasive species that are causing disruption to the local fisheries biodiversity. So it's a really interesting space to be working, actually. And the positive side of that potentially is that we also cited the first acropora species in the last year or so, which is a coral species from the Red Sea. So while the warming temperatures are bringing predatory fish, which are not great, they're also bringing corals. So potentially we might see a range shift in some of the reef building species as well as time goes on. So in the Eurasia role, I also went to Cape Verde, or managed the program of work on Cape Verde. So these are an island group off the west coast of Africa. This is an octopus pot. There's a theme to my talk. The octopus runs through it, that washed up on the beach. And it was just interesting. We did a bit of research to try and understand where this pot had come from, in terms of, whether it had come from West Africa, whether it had come from the other side of the Atlantic. And it was just interesting for me to see that, the marine pollution and the way it circulates and where it goes was quite a fascinating story. Another kind of key challenge on the Cape Verde Islands is coastal development, in particular sand mining. So some fabulous beaches, which are the third most important nesting beaches for loggerhead turtles globally, but they are sadly being developed mainly for tourism. But increasingly some other business interests are coming in. So a bit of a challenge to try and monitor and manage that. Finally, the last kind of new destination, in 2015, I went to São Tomé and Príncipe, which again, it's a small group of islands off the west coast of Africa. And we were invited in to support and help. And we were able to set up quite an established now program of work, which has been really successful. Another important turtle nesting area, this time green turtles, with some leatherbacks as well. Sadly, I never got to see one, but hopefully I'll get back one day to see them. And this is a stake marking the nesting beach so that the rangers can patrol them and check that people aren't stealing the eggs. So in 2019, I then took on my current role as head of marine. So this is a bit more of a strategic role. It involves less travel, less of the fun stuff, you might say, more of the kind of stare at your laptop and write reports and fundraise and do those kind of things. But also a really exciting role for me. And for the stage of my life, and I have a young family, it was kind of a good evolution to not be traveling quite so much. So FFI's marine program as a whole covers 17 countries globally. We work under three main approaches. So to secure effective site-based protection, which is marine protected areas, whether those are driven by the community or mandated by the government. We also seek to improve policy and practice. So you need that in order to have effective MPAs. But then we can also address some of the larger, more holistic issues facing the ocean, such as marine plastic pollution, and destructive fishing, oil and gas, extractive industries and things like that. And importantly, from FFI's side, everything we do has a focus on building capacity. So we won't seek to set up a new program of work in a country by having new staff or officers. We would always try and identify a local partner that maybe has some capacity or resource needs gaps that we can fulfill and help them address so that they are better equipped to deliver marine conservation over the longer term. So we currently work in 17 countries around the world, mainly focused in the tropics, as the areas with the most marine biodiversity, but also the areas where that biodiversity is most at threat. And just, I guess, a bit of a round off maybe in terms of why we still need to work and conserve the ocean. So back in 2005, global governments set a target to conserve 10% of the ocean by 2020. This table is from 2012. This table is from 2021, and we're only at 7%, and only 3% of that is fully or highly protected. So the real true protected areas. So we're way off achieving what we even wanted to achieve back in 2005. And now there's a new target that you may have heard of 30 by 30. So looking to protect 30% of land and sea by 2030. An ambitious target for sure, but hopefully global governments have got the kind of initiative and the interest to actually try and move things forwards. I think I'm kind of running out of time, so I might kind of gloss over this this slide, but just to pick up on a couple of things. So FFI was the co-lead of the Transform Bottom Trawling Coalition that was launched last year, which is seeking to really tackle and reduce and transform bottom trawling as a very impacting fishing gear globally. On the plastic side, we supported the microbead ban in the UK. So we were supporting the government to develop legislation to stop using microbeads in face scrubs and domestic products. I'm sorry if you can hear the cat, it's a bit distracting. Yeah, I mentioned kind of extractives. I'm going to gloss over that one. So this slide was just to show that to me now, I feel like conservation is so broad. So I came into it as a biologist, but you can't be a pure biologist and be a conservationist. To be a conservationist, I feel like you need to be an economist, you need to be a lawyer, you need to really understand how to engage with communities, you need to be an educator, you need to be willing to design things and put yourself out there as a giant fish and run around. There's so much now that goes into conservation and into achieving successful conservation that I think is really important. And also, just to flag, if anybody out there is looking for a career in conservation, you know, and maybe doesn't fit the science background, I don't think that should stop you. There are so many different roles out there that need support and help to drive things forwards. So yeah, go for it. And then just to say that, you know, the kind of holy grail of marine conservation to me is sustainable financing. So setting up these marine protected areas and finding a way for them to be sustainable over the long term. And pre-COVID, tourism was the kind of default mechanism for a lot of that. So a pay per use or pay per entry system. And now we're having to be a bit more creative, as obviously the disruption to the global tourism industry has highlighted the kind of the error of trying to rely on that. And yeah, so this is kind of drawing to an end. And I just wanted to finish in terms of thinking about the future. So there is a real opportunity this year in the marine kind of conservation policy landscape. And there was a great man, Peter Thompson is the UN Special Envoy for the Ocean. And he said at a meeting the other day that now is the time, essentially. If we all collectively do the right thing in 2022, it can go down in history as the year that we stop the decline in ocean health. And there are 6 key events from a policy angle happening this year that hopefully give global policymakers and decision makers the opportunity to do that. So the UN Environment Assembly happened in March in Nairobi, and the big outcome from that was the decision to create a global plastic treaty. So a real holistic way of tackling the problem that is plastic pollution. There's a UN Oceans Conference in June, which is really trying to bring together science and policy and create a lively debate around that. There's the subsidies discussions going on at the World Trade Organization, trying to remove and reduce harmful fishing subsidies so that we can stop some of these largely impacting fisheries that are underpinned by government funding, taxpayer funding often. There's the beyond areas beyond national jurisdiction discussions, negotiations that were last month as well, trying to really build a kind of implementable and scalable treaty for how we collectively manage the high seas. So those areas that are beyond national jurisdiction, beyond country waters. Sorry about the cat. There's the next COP27, building on from COP26, which made a lot of the headlines and media in Glasgow last year. And increasingly, the ocean is being recognized in that climate space as an area that we need to be focusing and building into global thinking. And then there's the International Seabed Authority meeting, which is they're the people that make the decision on whether deep sea mining is allowed to go ahead or not. So that's a key event for FFI as well in terms of providing information and trying to ensure that decisions are made based on the best available science that we have. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening. I hope it was interesting. And yeah, I think as Jasmine said, I'm very happy to take any questions that might have come up. And I'm sorry about the cat's bottom.
We love the cat. We love the cat. So yeah, thank you so much, Sophie. That was great. So we've already got a question in the chat from Libby, who's asked which GCSEs and A levels would you suggest for someone interested in marine biology?
Yeah, great question. So I did biology, geography, and Spanish back in the day when we did A levels rather than AS and A. I don't actually know how it works these days. That makes me sound really old. But yeah, I did biology, geography, and Spanish. So quite a mixed bag. I think as long as you do well in them, you can probably, and you have biology, I think there's probably a bit of flexibility on the other two, or three, however it works. And then on GCSEs, again, I think as long as you've got science in there, there's definitely room to do, anything else that you're interested in as well. Languages are really useful. I know some people are natural linguists and it comes to them, and some people are not, and it's really hard. But certainly for the job market and thinking about the future, if you have a language, it does make you a lot more employable, particularly if you want to go and work overseas, and do the kind of the fun side of conservation or marine biology.
Cool. So we've got a couple more questions me and Jasmine prepared earlier. So what is the most challenging part of your role at FFI, and what is the most enjoyable part?
Yeah, good questions. I think I would have given you a different answer 2 years ago. It's obviously been a funny old couple of years, which has, kind of changed the way I think everybody works. So for me, all my roles at FFI have been a really nice balance of travel and getting out there, seeing the sites on the ground, being able to input directly from a kind of scientific and technical perspective, but then being based in the UK, close to family and friends and all the rest of it. So that was definitely really appealing for me in terms of working with FFI. I think it's also a really great